Recently, the government-level communication between China and the United States seems to have increased significantly. First, Biden and Xi Jinping had a phone conversation early this month. Then the U.S. Trade Representative Katherine resumed contact with Liu He, the Vice Premier of Chinese government. Then the U.S. National Security Advisor Sullivan went to Switzerland to meet with Yang Jiechi. It seems that we are starting to see some sort of relationship relaxation happening between China and the US now. But on the other hand, Communist China's fighter jets became more aggressive recently in harassing the Taiwanese, which aroused more condemnation from the international community. The two major powers of the world, the US and China, are constantly quarreling over each other and throwing a smoke bomb at each other now and then, and the next moment you're seeing that they are trying to shake hands. So how do we get out of this chaos? What would the future Sino-US relation be? Welcome to Beyond the News, I'm Faye. Today we'll start from the meeting between Sullivan and Yang Jiechi and the new approach to the US-China trade relationship, which was just announced by the Biden administration recently. So to explore the essential relationship between China and the US in the three most important aspects: politics, economy and trade, and military. At the end of the program, you'll see the seemingly complicated status quo between the two countries is actually not so complicated. So stay tuned. The recent meeting of Sullivan and Yang Jiechi seemed to have, without much drama, the two negotiated behind closed doors for 6 hours. What can we interpret from this meeting? Well, it shows us the three main themes of Biden's China policy. The first is cooperation. Sullivan mentioned areas where the two sides are interested in working together to resolve major transnational challenges. Yang said China attaches great importance to President Biden's recent proactive attitude towards the Sino-US relations. He mentioned the positive attitude from Biden that the US has no intention to contain China's development and doesn't want a new Cold War with China. And the second aspect was about the competition. Sullivan said although the United States will work closely with its allies, it will continue to engage in high-level official dialogues with China to ensure responsible competition between the two nations. And Yang opposed the definition of competition in the Sino-US relation and agreed to maintain regular dialogue and communication. And the third is about the confrontation. Sullivan talked about the risks in the relationship between the two sides and raised concerns on China's human rights issues, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, the South China Sea and Taiwan issues. Yang, as always, asked the US to stop using these issues to interfere in China's internal affairs. So for the Chinese side, the best result from the meeting would be the finalization of the video conference, which is going to happen towards the end of the year between Biden and Xi. Since Biden came to power, Beijing has been showing pressing postures at every step. China has been trying to overpower Biden, and the goal is to make Biden admit the mistakes made by the US in causing the tension between the two nations, and to switch everything back to what was like before President Trump. At the end of the day, Xi can meet Biden in a leisurely and risk-free manner. As for Biden, on the surface, when dealing with the two most dangerous enemies, the Chinese government and the Russians, he shows his tolerance because he can meet and talk nicely with the enemies. Even if links has been torn apart, old politicians could still maintain a certain etiquette on their faces. This is Biden's diplomatic characteristics. A few days ago, the U.S. Trade Representative Katherine announced the Biden administration's new approach to the U.S.-China trade relationship, which mainly included 4 perspectives. First, re-examine and discuss with China the implementation of the first phase of the trade agreement, and China must abide by the signed commitments. We know that in the first phase of the trade agreement signed at the beginning of 2020, a direct purchase requirement that in the 2 years from 2020 to 2021, Beijing will need to make additional purchases valued at $200 billion of American goods and services. According to the current stats, China has not completed the agreement. From the Peterson Institute for International Economics so far, China has only completed 62%. And the second is to start a targeted tariff exclusion process. This does not directly indicate that Biden has opened a backdoor for the Chinese government, because during the Trump administration, there were such tariff exclusions for some irreplaceable commodities too. And the third is that the US still remains seriously concerned about the unresolved issues in the first phase agreement, especially the state-controlled non-market policies and practices that distort the free market competition. The US will use all tools and, as needed, developing new tools to defend the economic interests of the United States. Now, this is very interesting. If the Chinese government does not abide by the first phase agreement, what tools, or even new tools, would the United States be used to resolve the issues? If the US continues to use tariffs, or even take a step back and abandons a part of the tariffs, it is still very likely that China will not even be able to complete the agreement. Then, in turn, if the Biden administration develops new and stricter sanctions, it is going to be contradictory again. Because in this new approach, it is also stated that the goal of the United States is not to intensify trade tensions with China. Then how the US is going to urge China to abide by the signed agreement? This seems to be a hard proposition. In any case, what the Biden administration will do in 2 months is going to be a major highlight of the trade confrontation. And the fourth perspective is the most critical one for future trade. The US will continue to coordinate with allies and partners, engage in dialogue on China's non-market practices, and jointly find solutions and formulate rules for the 21st century trade and technology exchange. This is obvious. The US will be working with allies and excluding the Chinese government. Although Sullivan said he will maintain contact with the Chinese officials in order to ensure responsible competition, however, the essence is different. Working together with allies, it is for confronting the Chinese government. But keeping communicating with China is to make it follow the international rules and policies. Although both belong to the category of communication, these two types are in essence totally different. To sum it up, the Biden administration is actually drawing a blueprint of fierce competition with the Chinese regime, but not in conflict. Looking at the other side, the Chinese government will obviously not be willing to exclude from the United States allies, but it is hard to believe that the regime will start doing fair competition trades either. In the end of the day, the Biden administration would have to think, in order to truly build the guardrail of competition, bringing up the fear of the conflict of the Chinese government would be the last and only way. But how can this be achieved? The foreign policies of the Biden administration and the Trump administration are fundamentally different. Biden's approach is to throw out money, pulling allies, and creating an active diplomacy style. The relationship with allies has never been closer. And the Trump administration prioritized the interests of the US. For the red authoritarian, Trump was going straight, adopting ideological confrontation and exposing the bad essence of the regime. Think about it. If Biden can expose more of Communist China's ugly things to the world, would you think the Chinese would be really afraid of it? Well, I think it would. This is the pull the plug effect. At the end period of the first phase of the Sino-US trade war agreement, there is actually a phenomenon that has been becoming more and more prominent. According to data from the US Department of Commerce, in the 3 quarters from June last year to March this year, all foreign imports to the United States rose by nearly 34%, while imports from China to the US only increased by 6%. So it is clear that American companies are purchasing from other places than China. In the past, the American toys, textiles, shoes, and other low-tech products were almost exclusively made in China. But now, the made in China stuff is no longer glory for the US. Moreover, from 2015 to 2018, the annual growth rate of the US imports from China was less than 1/5 of the overall growth rate. However, for the same period, the annual growth rate of US exports to China was 15%, much higher than the average value of 0.6%. These numbers are showing that the trade dependence between the United States and China is being balanced a lot through the trade war established by Trump. Now that I think of it, this picture really reminds me of the recent China-AU war in coals, isn't it? The Chinese government is trying to prevent Australian coal from being imported as a means to punish the Aussie for talking too loud about the virus origin. But it ends up that Chinese big companies still need to buy the Aussie coal. They're transporting the coal to countries like Vietnam first, then to China, ending up paying more money for buying the same thing. That is carrying the rock, hitting its own toe, from a Chinese saying. The changes in the two largest trading bodies in the world will also affect the global trade pattern. If things go on like this for economy and trade, the factor that was once causing the most fear the United States and other Western countries have for China will gradually lose its weight. So what will really affect and determine the Sino-US relations and the world pattern in the future? From the perspective of economy and trade, politics and military, which one of these three perspectives do you think plays the most critical role? Please leave me a comment on this and we will continue to discuss it in our next program. If you like today's talk, please give me a thumbs up. Your like will bring our voice far and wide. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. I'll see you again in the next episode. Thank you for watching Beyond the News. I'm Faye. Until next time.